when people ask me about meditation, mindfulness and whatever, the one big thing I say is try to see it as something you get to do rather than you have to do.
Hi there, and welcome to another edition of the 1% Better podcast with your host, Rob O'Donoghue.
Hello folks, welcome back to yet another episode of the podcast. I'm into episode 8 of season 2 and it's flying along. Delighted that you're checking in and hopefully you'll enjoy this episode as much as I had putting it together, and actually listening back to it a few days ago was really interesting. So lots of good stuff in it. Looking back over the last week, the episode with Ted Dinan last Friday, very encouraging numbers over the last week that's checked this out from lots of different places. With Ted being a leader in the field of psychobiotics, this has got a big reach, and with the book out, The Psychobiotic Revolution, a lot of people wanted to hear the story, not only just about Ted and the work he's doing in that, but his own backstory, which is fascinating. So if you haven't checked it out yet, do. Episode 7, very much worth the listen, and all about enhancing your mood with positive bacteria. Another thing the last week, I guess, as I mentioned probably on the previous episodes, the listenership has gone up a lot over the last 5 or 6 shows, which is really great. One thing that stuck with me last season when I interviewed Andrew Mangan for the podcast was his own insight as a professional podcaster, how things evolved over time and grew slowly. He said after 9 years he became an overnight success in the whole podcasting business, and it seems as if the numbers are growing, not to that anywhere his levels, but they're certainly going up and up, and that's really encouraging. It again just means that more of you are checking it out, maybe telling a friend, sharing it on one of the socials. It's managing to get a broader reach. Obviously, as I interview guests from different walks of life, that in itself has a listenership or a following that would be broader. So it's all positive, and I hope that continues. I really, really do. In the last week alone, I talked to a few people that are interested in setting up their own podcasts. I know one of the things I offer is a few hours a month coaching pro bono or just advice, and more than happy to talk to a few people that are interested in doing something similar. It's really, really encouraging to hear the feedback from them that they're enjoying what this is all about, and if it's in any way giving them some sort of inspiration or ideas to move forward with their own projects, that is awesome. So again, the offer is always there if anyone wants to chat about anything in relation to podcasting or coaching in general. I do try to do a few hours a month on that for pro bono, so happy to do so. On the content that I'm putting out, as you might be aware, over the last few weeks I started to release a 1 Minute Monday video that's on the site under videos, 3 of them so far. Definitely growing in numbers viewing it, and lots of good feedback, interesting ideas coming back. I'm open to other folks actually doing 1 Minute Mondays. If they had a topic, a tip that they'd like to share, give it a shot, put it out there. It'd be really cool to see it take off and others potentially doing it. But I'm conscious that the content has to be right for me. But as long as it's interesting, it's meaningful, it's actionable, I'm good with putting it out there. And I hope that is what you're seeing. So the 1 Minute Mondays will continue over the next while. I have a good few in the pipeline that I want to share. Within every episode, I get a new 1 or 2 tips that I like to share. So keep that going. Also, I put out the blog last week that I've been teasing for a while, the 100 days without alcohol so far in 2018, dry 18, that's on the site as well. A lot of people actually just, instead of listening to podcasts, they read blogs, and I find the audience or the feedback I got from the people that read the blog typically don't listen to the podcast, which is cool. It just means you have to go down different medias for sharing content, but it's interesting to see how that works, and a lot of people connected, resonated with the story. And the last piece is the podcast that I talk a little bit about over the last few weeks called the 864. I am recording episodes for that. It's 15 minutes long each episode, trying to figure out when I'm going to roll that out. Obviously, with all the other stuff going on, it's difficult to keep on top of everything, and I really want to focus on the core content, which is the 1% Better podcast, which is the 1 Minute Mondays, which is a bit of blogging. But this one will come, and plan a launch where I'll probably put out a bunch over the course of a week and see how that goes down. One of the other things I'm going to play a little bit with is the Patreon page, where I'm putting content behind that subscription-based service. If folks want to get access to that, it's a sign up and a subscription fee on a monthly basis. What I'm thinking of doing, and what I did for this week, is put the episode of the interview up there a week prior to full release. If you so wish, you would be able to hear it in its raw enough format in advance of the Friday release. But that's just one idea I'm playing with there. So this week's episode is with Jim Breen. So I connected with Jim last year, and we were hoping to do the podcast in season 1, but just never were able to make it happen. And then we reconnected at the start of season 2. He actually liked an article I put out on Twitter around the hand dryers and the meditation. We reconnected and then said, let's get this done. We met in Galway the day after St. Patrick's Day to talk all through his story, his journey. So Jim is the founder and executive chairman of a tech company called Pulse Learning. He's also the executive chairman of a new venture called Be Cloud Smart. He came to the public's attention in 2012 when he appeared on the TV show Secret Millionaire. It was his first, I suppose, appearance in the public limelight. And while he was working on the show, which was helping with a community in Dublin around suicide, he started to uncover or peel back some of his own mental health issues around depression. From there, he started to work on that in a very much open fashion. He talks about it publicly on some TV shows around that time and has continued to work on that over the last number of years. He also set up Cycle Against Suicide, a charity bike ride to raise awareness and funds in the areas of suicide and mental health. Such an interesting guy. We spent well over an hour talking, listening from my perspective to his story and looking back in time, looking at what he's done in the last just the 6 years and how the whole conversation around mental health has improved and progressed in Ireland. He's also now doing work in Australia in this area. Really, this is focusing more on mental health in the workplace, which Jim calls like the last bastion of stigma in the area of mental health. We go into details on that. Genuinely, it's one of the most, I don't know, is intense the right word, but engaging conversations and interviews I've done in all the podcasts I've done. Listening to it back, it's probably the one I've tweaked the least or edited the least because it just flowed, and he is a very well-spoken, successful man that has a lot to share, wants to do good, and we talk about a lot of things. The details are in the show notes, and yeah, I really, really hope you enjoy this one. If you do, please take a minute at the end to share it out, like it, tell a friend. It's, again, mental health is so important that we talk about it, and I think if I've learned anything over the last number of episodes, especially the one with Josh Quigley, the reaction to that was huge because of the topic and because people could connect and resonate with the stuff Josh was going through. As you'll hear, Jim has been going through similar stuff over the years, and he's developed tools and techniques to try and battle against it, which he shares, and I think that can only be a good thing. So look, just a last call out, please do subscribe to the show on iTunes or any of the other portals you listen to podcasts on. That's always good, so you get the new releases when they come out. Enjoy the podcast with Jim Breen. I am on location in Galway, and I'm here with Jim Breen. Good morning, how are you?
Good morning, how are you?
Thanks so much for doing this.
You're very welcome.
I know we tried to do it last year, and now that I'm into season 2, we're able to make it happen, which is great. So Jim, you're the founder and executive chairman of Pulse Learning, and I see you have a new venture, executive chairman of Be Cloud Smart.
Yeah, Be Cloud Smart is a brand new venture. Really exciting, actually. It's all around cloud technology and disrupting an already disrupted marketplace. Mm-hmm. And yeah, very excited about it. Very excited.
Very cool. So we maybe get into more of that as well. Jim, would it be fair to say that you came to probably the mainstream Irish public attention with your appearance on Ireland's Secret Millionaire?
Yeah, that was in 2012. I guess prior to that, I would have been kind of kept very sort of a private profile, right? And the request to take part in Secret Millionaire wasn't something that I was looking for, and when it was initially put to me, it was something I initially said no to. I'd been asked a couple of times to do a few similar type things, and it just didn't seem right. And when I was approached initially, the crew from RT and from their independent production company were keen, and in fact they spoke to me. I was in France, and I said no, and they said, can we meet? And I said, sure. I'm going to be in Kerry in 3 days' time, so if you want to come to Kerry, for sure we'll meet. And generally, when people from Dublin have the opportunity of going all the way to Kerry or saying no, or accepting a no, they accept the no. But they came, and by the time they came, I'd actually already decided to do it because I'd seen John Concannon, coincidentally another Galway man, do the programme the year before, and I thought the format was really powerful. And I also thought that in terms of just coincidentally where I was in my life at that time, that the time maybe to explore mental health. And I wasn't ready to go to a therapist. I wasn't ready to admit to myself that there was something wrong enough that I would go for help myself. But I thought that this was kind of an unusual way of exploring the theme. And I know that sounds a bit mad, crazy, but it was really very much around that. It was kind of a way of getting a sneak peek into the whole world of mental health without necessarily, exposing myself. And of course, that idea and that plan fell to shreds when I got involved with the 4 sets of people that we met with on the Secret Millionaire program. And really, again, fast forward to today, it's incredible how much of a bond we still have. The Norris family and Nikki, Clear and Shauna from Headway, and the folks from the Den, and of course Suicide Awareness Dublin 15, the 4 sets of people that we met with. So it was on the programme I spoke about my own battle with mental health, and I'm not sure if I used a label, Rob. I'm not sure if I kind of said I battle with depression or I battle with anxiety, because again, I don't know if labels are all that useful. I think we seek them, and we like to put labels on things on the basis that, well, if it's a diagnosis somehow, that's getting closer to solving the issue. But also, I'm not even sure if I knew enough about myself then to be able to say what I thought the problem was. But I did say I battle with my mental health, and I think I was also planting a seed that I wanted to do something about it. I wanted to do something about this idea that it's not okay not to feel okay, and it's not okay to ask for help. And the response to that program was incredible. Like literally thousands and thousands and thousands of phone calls, texts, letters, emails, and everybody saying, "How can we help?" That was the response, and I loved that because the response in a way was maybe easy for people to make because they didn't have to ask too much prying about how I was. It was more, how can we help? Right. And that then was the catalyst for Cycle Against Suicide, which we founded almost immediately and had our first cycle in April of 2013. So from September to April to, organising all that. I still don't know. And you mentioned just this morning when we met that it was Seamus Nolan, who at the time was an inspector in the Guards in Limerick and now is a superintendent based in Templemore. Yeah. And it was Seamus was one of the very, very, very first people I met on that journey. Right. And Seamus got the Guards and later the PSNI to come in behind us and support what we were trying to do. Right. But it was all magic. I mean, it would be impossible to kind of redo it, because how it happened. So in terms of coming into the public sort of perception, it came from Secret Millionaire.
Okay. When you look back, I guess the question that I had, and maybe it's been asked to you a few times though, because you were a highly successful businessman, and I saw another couple of videos online of Pulse Learning and how well it had done, and maybe we can touch on where the origins of that. But being successful, making money, was there that perception that person shouldn't have any mental health issues? They should be happy. They have everything from the outside. Did it almost make it more difficult to almost come to terms that actually I do have that?
Yeah, I think there's got to remember, it was 2012 and 2018. We've come so far. We really as a as an island of Ireland, we've travelled such an amazing journey just in those 6 years. And that's not to say that there aren't serious issues with mental health, with suicide on our island. But in terms of, you know, being able to normalise a conversation around mental health and emotional well-being, we've just done so well. You know, I'm so proud of us. You know, that and asking for help is a predictor of saving lives. You know, the more people who ask for help, you know, the more we'll be able to fight the fight against suicide on our island. You know, it is true that more than half of the people who die by suicide have never, you know, reached out formally for support, whether it be from a helpline or a GP or whatever else. And that's an amazing statistic. It's unbelievable. You might think, you know, that half of people who die by suicide haven't actually been able to reach out for help. And that's our battle. You know, our battle is to support those 50% who haven't yet been able to ask, and those who can ask, those who've had the courage to ask, that we make sure that other people will respond as best as we can. So I think in terms of 2018, the challenge is very different. And I'm just back from Australia, where we kicked off a program out there called I Am Here in conjunction with Woolworths.
Right.
And it's a program for mental well-being, mental health in the workplace, which is kind of the last bastion of stigma that remains. You know, anybody listening to this podcast today who, you know, it's one thing to mention to your family or your friends that you're battling with anxiety or depression, or you're having self-harming thoughts, or you are self-harming, or you're having suicidal ideation, suicidal thoughts. It's one thing to mention it to your friends, your family, your colleagues. It's a different thing entirely to go to your boss and say, you know, I'm not feeling well, and the reason is because of my mental health. And that's something that we really need to address, not just here in Ireland, but across the globe. And the project that we launched in Australia, the I Am Here project, which I'm really proud of, and we're kind of, when I say launched, we sort of kicked it off and we began the work on the videos, etc. when I was there.
Right.
And I'm flying back again on Friday of next week. And we're going to do more work on that project. And that's a project around if you're in the workplace, Rob, and somebody comes to you and they say, I'm not feeling well, it's helping you as the person they're coming to know what to do.
Right.
And it's actually very simple and it's very easy once you know how. It's show you care, it's ask the question, and it's call for help. And those 9 words, show you care, ask the question, call for help, are evidence-based, really powerful words of advice for anybody who's trying to help other people.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got some beautiful, like one of the first videos we shot, this great lady, amazing lady, who she lost her sister. Her sister died by cancer, and she went back to work almost immediately. And a few months later, one of her customers came into her shop. Again, so Woolworths again is one of the largest retail, you know, operations in Australia, and she was a store manager. And one of her regular customers, came into the store and said, you know, he said, look, I want to give you some feedback on your store. And she said, okay, sure, that would be great. Let's come into my office and we can chat. And they sat down in her office, and he said, look, I don't want to give you feedback on your store. I'm concerned about you. And she said, what? He said, yeah, you don't sing anymore. And she said, what do you mean I don't sing anymore? And he said, well, the last 3 months I've been coming to the store and you no longer sing and you no longer have the banter with your colleagues. Are you okay? And she broke down. This, you know, kind of stranger, right? Somebody she only knew like as a customer in her store, but he had the wherewithal, he had something to be able to reach out to her and ask the question, you know, so show you care, ask the question, and then together they called for help and she got the help she needed. And today she's this incredibly bubbly, amazing person. She's found her old self back. Okay. But it mightn't have been like that, you know, it mightn't have been like that had that person not had the, you know, the ability to be able to reach out to her. And this I Am Here campaign is giving people that ability, encouraging people that it's not all that hard to show you care. It's not all that hard to ask the question, Rob, are you okay? Are you okay today? Are you considering self-harm? Are you having thoughts of suicide? Are you depressed? And as Irish people, we think, oh my God, I could never ask such a direct question. And in fact, when somebody is in trouble, asking those questions in that direct a way, or when you feel somebody's in trouble, asking those questions in that direct a way is exactly the right thing to do. And it just requires, that that. And then where do we call for help? And the great news is that today, whether it be Northern Ireland or here in the Republic, there is a lot of help available. Not perfect by any means, not perfect, but there is help available. And again, my view always has been, let's put the pressure on the system for the system to perform even better. Let's not complain about the system. Let's put the pressure on the system. Let's do whatever we can. So anybody, and I as you can imagine, get a lot of calls from people who are in trouble. And, my view, my belief is, let's find that help in the system, wherever it is. And if we have to put pressure on the system to get that help, let's do it. Because that's a better outcome than feeling paralyzed and feeling that we can't get that help. So show you care, ask the question, call for help. And I guess when I first spoke about, so that's kind of our challenge today. When I first spoke about this in 2012, it was a very different world because, again, the presumption was, well, if you're doing well in business, you must be fine. You must be okay. You can't be somebody who'd be battling with a mental health issue. And I think because of the time it was, and because of who people felt I was, and because of this admission of vulnerability, which was done maybe in such a way that people saw it as a strength, that you could ask for help and you could say, I'm in trouble. It was possibly a turning point in terms of how we began to change the conversation and change the dialogue. And I don't mean that in terms of me being that person at that time. I think that was the right time to have those kinds of conversations. And I just happened to have that opportunity given to me by RTE to be that person at that stage. Since then, we've had hugely courageous people who have been able to talk about their challenges. And that has been something that's been very useful for young and old, male and female, to be able to, share their own experiences. And again, one of the things about mental health is, it's like depression and anxiety, self-harm, suicidal ideation. The one good thing you can say about all of them is that they're not sexist, they're not ageist, they're not racist. They don't have any, demographic, but they'll attack everybody. And, sometimes you might even say they'll attack the strongest of us. And it's for that reason that, all of us need to be, open to that. And I've spent quite a bit of work with people recently in Australia where they have a very strong view of, the 1 in 4, in meaning that, 1 in 4 of us will experience a mental health issue at some stage in our life. And I think it's not 1 in 4, it's 4 in 4. Every one of us will experience a mental health issue, either ourselves or someone close to us in our life. So therefore, all of us need to have the basic training and the basic support available. And if you today, listening to this podcast, do not have any challenges, that's fantastic. But maybe you will in the future, or maybe one of your friends will in the future or today. And in that scenario, wouldn't it be great to know what to do? And that's, I think, the next level of, where we need to get to next. And I think that the difference maybe in terms of our approach to this versus other people's approach is we don't need any funding for that. We don't need any government, support. We don't need any minister saying, let's change legislation. This is all within us to do right now. And I guess maybe that's that kind of comes back to my own sort of entrepreneurial mindset. That there's an awful lot of things you can do without getting permission.
Yeah.
And let's do those things.
Okay. You mentioned Australia, and that's where you've kind of set up the I Am Here program. Have you looked at other countries to see, are some of them more advanced than where we are, and what are they doing that's better that we could adopt?
Yeah, I think that interestingly, like Ireland, and it's probably a bit of a hindrance in a way. We're actually no better or worse than most other developed countries.
Okay.
And I don't get frustrated by the silliness of politicians or the silliness of people, who are in positions who should know better. I don't get upset by it. However, it is something that I do get frustrated. Or I do find it at times difficult when people will say, well, we need to expect that there will always be, certain percentage of people who take their life, or a certain percentage of people who will battle with depression, or a certain percent of people who will self-harm.
Yeah.
There's no benefit in that thinking. If you look at it in a different way and you say every single person, every individual, just on their own, has a chance at the best possible life that they can have. And our job is not to look at this in a statistical way or an average way. Just every single person has got an opportunity to be loved, to be lovable, to feel that love and to feel that support. And, Ireland as a country is no better or worse. But really, Ireland doesn't battle with depression. It's individuals, it's people battle with depression. And, my view always would be, don't get fooled about how we're doing statistically. Keep the focus on the individual. That said, we are doing certain things in Ireland better than other places in the world, and Cycle Against Suicide is one of those kind of initiatives where, because of the nature of just the Irish psyche and how we are quite tightly bound to each other at a community level, we can reach out, and there's connection between schools and communities and the GAA and rugby and FAI and sports and and again in rural Ireland, not from here in Kilbeaconty, County Galway, there's a wonderful community spirit where it's a small rural part of Ireland where it is the church and the GAA grounds, the local pub, community hall, and within that, this is a very tightly bound community who unfortunately had their own visit from suicide a number of years ago. Niall O'Donoghue, the Galway hurler, and how that community then felt that pain and decided to really come around and try and do something as a community. And in those ways that Ireland is able to kind of come together as a community, whether it be like Kilbeaconty, like a geographical community, or whether it be a community in terms of travelling community, LGBTI, etc. There are opportunities for us in Ireland to fight this fight against mental health and against suicide on our island in a way that, it's harder to do in a place like Australia where it's just so vast, or in a place like, the States where it's, so dispersed and, so many people. We're 6.5 million people on our island, and we can get that message out. It's okay not to feel okay, and it's absolutely okay to ask for help. And we can do it in a way where literally you can cycle around our island in a couple of weeks with hundreds of other people, visiting schools, visiting community halls, visiting, the locality, and sharing that message in a very uplifting, positive way. So things like that were actually ahead of other places because, we have had, even things like, tidy towns and other initiatives like that have worked in Ireland in a way that they haven't worked in other places, because we can get together, and it's not just rural Ireland can do that. There's a lot of amazing initiatives that take place in, inner city Cork, inner city Dublin, inner city Limerick, and other places where there might be, disadvantaged areas of, where, there are challenges in terms of unemployment, etc. And again, in those communities, it's incredibly heartening to see the amazing work that goes on within those communities. Mm-hmm. And I guess we'd always look to the goodness of what's happening and be optimistic about it, rather than, feel pessimistic or feel bad about, what we're not doing. I like to see what we're doing, try and shine a spotlight on it, and see if we can do even more of that.
Yeah. No, it's interesting, just what you mentioned, shining the spotlight on it. I read a book a while back called it's the Heath Brothers. It's around change management. I think it's called Switch, and they talked about going to different countries and identifying, I think it was malnourishment in Vietnam, but there were certain parts where the kids were perfectly healthy, so they kind of shined the spotlight, figured out what they were doing right, and then try to replicate that out.
Brilliant.
And you can kind of uplift that and do the same with, I suppose, with suicide, and what parts of the communities across Ireland have very low rates of it, and what are they doing that might be different? Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, very much so. And in fact, I'm an advisor to The Wheel, which is a representative charity for all other charities in Ireland, and The Wheel do incredible work. Their CEO, Deirdre Garvey, is an amazing lady. Like, she's such a real, she's a CEO in non-for-profit and charity Ireland, who's an exemplar for how great leadership can happen and does happen. And within The Wheel, I'm involved there in a program called Spark Change. And Spark Change is exactly what you've said there. Okay. It's really around going out to the people who are the change agents in Ireland, whether that be, organising a bridge club for, the elderly in your neighbourhood, or, mentioned Tidy Towns earlier, or it could be around mental health, or it could be sport for disadvantaged youth, whatever it might be. But there is amazing stuff going on in Ireland. And, that's actually not at all separate from mental health. It's completely connected.
It's community, it's tribe, getting everybody together. Yeah, absolutely.
And there's great benefit from that. And the idea of Spark Change, again, is let's shine the spotlight within communities of the great work that's been done, in order that other communities will be inspired to follow, and that lessons can be learned from one area to another. And the Spark Change initiative is something, again, that's about to be rolled out. It's something that hopefully, in 12 months' time, a lot more people will have heard of. We haven't launched it yet. The plan is to launch it, midway through 2018. So in a few months' time. And it's again this idea, exactly as you said, of showing people, what can be done, the art of the possible, if you like.
Cool, very good. Just to step back a little bit, so it was when you started to talk about it, or to realise that you were suffering or had mental health challenges, you were around 41, 42, I think. Yeah. When you were 15, when you were 10, when you were 20, was there anything looking back that you said, that was probably a signal that I ignored, or how you even kind of locked it away? Was there any things that came up that you could potentially share that others might resonate with?
Yeah, I think in 2012 I was 42, and it actually took me a few years before I found myself a therapist that was right for me.
Right.
I tried 2 therapists, and it was a disaster. Like, it was so bad.
Was that just, did you think that it was because it was the first and second person and it was new to you, or do you think it just was a matter of going through the process of finding the right one?
I think the reality is that it's complex and everybody's different. There are few truths I think I found. So one truth is, just like there are good, teachers and bad teachers, or good lawyers and bad lawyers, or there are good carpenters and bad carpenters. There are good counsellors, therapists, and there are bad counsellors and therapists. People who, just aren't as good as they need to be. Mm-hmm. And that's a fact, and that's a difficult truth for people to hear.
Right.
But it is a truth. just because you're joining, a vocation like, say, teaching or therapy, doesn't guarantee you'll be a good teacher or a good therapist. So that's one truth. The second truth is you might meet the best therapist in the world and you might not be ready for them. So that's also a truth.
Mm-hmm.
And in that case, that's something, again, that complicates it. And then the other truth is, I believe strongly that in addition to the fact that sometimes there are good therapists and bad therapists, sometimes there are, you're just not ready for it, or the time is wrong. But the third thing is that there's also a degree of fit, like it's important to have alignment between you and your therapist. It's a very special relationship.
Like a chemistry almost, isn't
Absolutely.
it? Yeah.
It's exactly, a chemistry is the perfect word. And my first two therapists, the first one, it was a disaster. I mean, I can tell you, I was recommended this therapist. I went into his room. Every colour in the room was gunmetal grey. There was no bright colours. There was a desk. There was a metal desk. He faced me in a chair that I was looking out at a grey door. There was no eye contact. He said yes at the start of the hour and poised his pen and took notes, didn't say anything. And other than about 3 minutes into the session, his phone rang.
Right.
And he said, "Do you mind if I take this?" And
God.
I said, "Yeah, I do." He said, "Okay." And he picked up the phone, he put it down, you could hear the phone go beep, beep, beep. And it was awful. Now, I think that perhaps...
It's like a sketch of how not to do a therapy, yeah.
No, I think the reality is if I went back there today, I might find that it wasn't as grey as I thought it was.
Right.
And maybe there was some soft furnishings there that I didn't spot. But that was a disaster. And then the second time I met a therapist, she was a very different person, and we met in a very different location. And I shared with her the very bad experience I had the first time, because I went back to that first therapist a few times to try and see if it could be, if this was just like, because you don't know any better, right?
Sure. You don't have previous experience.
Yeah. And like, I literally went back to the same grey room every time. And again, it's funny because I look back on it now and I said maybe the room was less grey, but it wasn't, because it was a few times I went back there. And then the second therapist knew all of that. And at the end of the hour, she basically turned to me and she said, that sounds pretty serious. I'm not sure if I'm capable of helping you.
Okay. And
I felt this momentary sugar rush to say, great, I am as messed up as I thought I was.
Yeah.
And then a severe down of, oh my God, it's more rejection. Like,
right.
And that's like a lot of this thing is about rejection. So I was rejected by a therapist. I go, oh my God. Now, that again wasn't her intent waking up that morning was not to find somebody that she could reject. But she obviously felt that the issues that I was facing were beyond her ability to help.
Right.
And then, probably a year later, I met this most amazing, incredible person who I am seeing still, 3 or 4 years later, and will always see.
Yeah.
And she has been a lifeline, an angel, incredibly capable and experienced and qualified, and also open to trying different things. And I feel so hugely grateful that I found her. I'm also grateful though that it took a couple of goes, because when I am asked by people about whether medication is the best response, or whether therapy or meditation or mindfulness or sport or music or creativity, my answer is very much always says, I always will say, first of all, we're all unique and human and individual. So what will work for one person won't necessarily work for somebody else. That's number one. And again, that's a difficult truth at times, but it is true. There is no formula that's applicable to everybody. The second thing is that where we are at our time in our life will make a big impact on, what's the right route for us to take.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that for me, with my therapist that I have, it was the right thing at the right time, and will also be part of my journey as I go forward, because as far as we have progressed, and we've made some really great progress over the last few years that has been helped me. That's ultimately, to boil it down, Rob, I've got a much stronger resilience today than I've ever had.
Mm.
And when I do fall, and when I do, when depression hits me, I have a much quicker bounce back from it than I used to have. And for me, and again, I can only speak for me, I don't believe that, mental well-being for me is going to be ever around, spending the rest of my life where I won't have to battle depression.
Mm-hmm.
Rather, it's going to be where those instances happen less frequently,
mm-hmm.
and when they happen, I'll get out of them faster and quicker.
Yeah.
And that resilience and bounce back ability are gifts that I've got from therapy that I don't. So, sport has been a huge benefit to me, and I keep fit. I know you do, and it's a huge, huge, huge benefit for my mental health.
Yeah.
That on its own, though, isn't enough.
Mm-hmm.
I watch what I eat. I know you were talking before we started the podcast about being alcohol free for 2018.
Yeah,
I am as well, and it's something that it's partly to do with the fact that I'm rowing pretty seriously this year.
Yeah,
but it's also, I have a lot going on, and it kind of suits where my energy is right now, to really be mindful and to be gentle with myself, to be caring for myself. So all of those things are really helpful. Meditation, I try and meditate once a day. I watch what I'm eating, I'm alcohol free, I'm doing exercise. Sleep is another critical thing for me. But on top of all of those, therapy is really important. It's kind of like the glue, if you like.
Okay.
And that's just me. I'm not saying that that's what'll work for other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I also don't think necessarily that what I'm doing today is the solution for the rest of my life. It's, you're kind of constantly looking for what that's going to be.
Yeah. It's interesting you touched on an awful lot of things that I touch on during this podcast around practices that people would adopt to kind of be successful or keep on the straight and narrow in lots of ways. You mentioned meditation and mindfulness. I know that's how we reconnected on Twitter over an article. Is there any specific type you do, or you mentioned once a day? I do once a day, and it's funny, even before this interview today, out in Galway last night, early to bed, sleep is very important. When I was putting together the questions, sometimes I would get quite anxious before even doing an interview, and I spent 15 minutes just meditating, and the flow actually came to me of how to actually conduct the interview. For me, that's the big change I've had over the last 3 years, where I do meditation every day. I used to get quite anxious before work. Might have 15 meetings in a day's work and half-hour sections. You wake up and just, you'd feel thrown off. I started to practice over the last 2 or 3 years, and it has had a massive turnaround for me. Like you talked about resilience or bounce back, my time of being anxious gets much smaller, or an incident at work or whatever would throw me for much shorter periods of time before I get back to normal. So meditation is the one I talk about a lot. Is there any specific types you do, or have you developed or tried around with different approaches for that? Yeah,
it's kind of a funny one, because again, sort of in a lot of my life, I'm fairly disciplined. So maybe to kind of answer in a sort of an indirect way, if there's somebody listening right now who's hungover, or who's absolutely jaded tired, who hasn't been able to sleep because their kids have been up, or they've been eating crap all day yesterday and they're feeling whatever, that's okay too. It's like, part of for me, what works with meditation is it's not strict. So and again, this is just for me, but I've deliberately said I am not setting out to do it once a day, or I feel bad if I don't do it. And funnily enough, what actually happens, the current one I'm using, the current app is it's called Insight Timer, I think.
Yeah.
And it's just like hundreds of different ones. And the only thing it does really is it just kind of gathers all of these different ones, and it gives you, you can pick whether you want to do for 5 to 10 minutes or 10 to 15 minutes, whatever. And it just gives you the heading. And I like that because depending on how I'm feeling, like if I'm doing it last thing before I go to bed at night, it might be around, calming down or, relaxing or whatever. First thing in the morning, it might be, morning meditation or get set for the day or whatever. Or as you said, like if it's just before you go into something quite stressful, it might be just kind of a breathing or whatever it is. And because it's not a strict structure for me, I actually find myself doing it a lot more than if I had to do it every day.
Yeah.
So I kind of feel like, I get to do it rather than I have to do it. Jerry Duffy, who's a great friend of mine, introduced me to that thinking of, I don't have to go for a run. I get to go for a run. I don't have to train. I get to train. I don't have to go for meditation. I get to. So I think of everything that I would maybe, if when people ask me about meditation, mindfulness and whatever, the one big thing I say is try to see it as something you get to do rather than you have to do, and do it whenever. And yes, for me, it kind of suits me better to do it first thing in the morning. I just do a thing where I set my alarm for, like, say, I'm up early at the moment because of fitting into Australia time. So, the alarm goes for kind of 5 o'clock in the morning, and then it goes for 20 past 5. And between 5 and 20 past 5, I just do it as I'm kind of waking up. And then I'm out of bed at 20 past 5, and it just works for me. Now, for other people, there's a different, there's a friend of mine is a nurse on shift duty. So, it's a totally different kind of routine that she will have. But I would say, do it as lightly as you can, don't feel yourself under too much pressure. And again, like, I'll do it for 5 minutes, and it has an impact, even for 5 minutes has an impact. It does help. And I did do Headspace for a year, and I found that great. I like, however, the freedom of Insight Timer, because there's no, you're literally doing one. You're not
in a program.
There's no program, exactly. And for me, that helps.
Yeah. And that's a really good distinction of you get to do it rather than have to do it. Because I would find myself saying, right, I get up every morning and I do 20 minutes. There's an element of having to do rather than it's a pleasure to do it, and that little change makes a massive difference. You mentioned food. I interviewed on the podcast, I haven't released this episode yet, by the time I release this one it'll probably be out, professor in UCC, Ted Dinan, and he's a psychotherapist as well. And he's a lecturer, psychotherapist, researcher, developed this, released a book called Psychobiotics, and I'm fascinated by the gut and intuition, and there's a lot of brain cells down here. They call it your second brain. And he said how important what you eat and what you treat your gut in affects your mood. Is there certain things that you would stay through trial and error you found that you stay absolutely away from that can have an impact on your mental state?
Well, it's interesting, again, like that whole, so this thinking, right? So somebody listening to this podcast today, I think it's a very fair response to say, that's seriously, you're telling me there's brain cells in your gut? Like, that's crazy. And it's totally fine to not be acceptant of that, like 100% fine. And a kind of an alternative view, which is the view I have, is I don't know whether that's right or wrong, but I like the thought of it. I like the idea that I can actually help myself if I think that maybe there's a way where my gut, which I do feel kind of drives a lot of my decisions, is kind of able to have a certain degree of feeling or thought or whatever, right? Again, without going into it too much. And if I can keep that healthy, that's going to help me think clearer, act clearer, So I love that thinking. And I am, again, what I'm going to say next will sound completely ridiculous. But I've got great energy at the moment, and people who would know me right now can pick up on that. You know, it's like, you know, I'm really clean in my thinking. I'm sharp in my thinking, but also I'm sort of, there's a good, I guess, energy coming from me. And where I notice that most is kids. And when I mean kids, maybe I'm talking about like literally toddlers, you know, 7, 8, 9-year-olds, early teenagers, late teenagers. They really pick up on that. And when you're in a good place, they pick up on that. And, you know, I think there's a lovely connection you can get with younger people when, you know, you have that good energy coming from you. So going back to the question, you know, what kind of foods would I tend to avoid or gravitate towards? What I find works best for me is a very simple rule that the closer it is to the ground, the better. In other words, the less processed it is, the better. And as well as that, I'll deliberately do things now and then that aren't close to the ground. So, for example, I had a cup of tea just before the start of this interview and I put 2 sugars in it. Right. I don't always have sugar in my tea, but you know what? Sometimes it's totally fine.
The cheat day is allowed now.
Yeah, and like even kind of, you know, being totally okay about that as well. You know, not like yesterday was you know, we're meeting today. It's the 18th of March. Yesterday was Paddy's Day. And, you know, neither of us, as it happens, were drinking. But I had 4 coffees yesterday, you know. Yeah. And that's okay too. It's totally fine. 4 coffees, had an alcohol-free beer, going to bed, and as you're saying, there's loads of sugar and stuff in that. Yeah. And that's all fine. It's not about being, I think, so completely pure. And the reason I say that is 2 things. First of all, I think it's important that, and again, this is just what works for me, but first of all, I think it's important that we don't get too prudish about this. I think it's important that we don't make this too hard on ourselves. That's number one. But the second thing is that if we go completely clean all the time, I think there's actually diminishing returns from it. I think you have to have a little bit of dirty food, you know, within the system so that you appreciate being clean even more, because the body and the mind get used to whatever you give them. So like, you know, there's people who can manage on very little sleep. There's people who can manage with bad food or drinking excessively or whatever it might be, and they'll do better than if you're not used to that. So definitely you can get used to things. I think for me it's about I want to be generally cleaner, generally more healthy, generally eating more healthy stuff, and also not so completely kind of disciplined about it that I lose some of the benefit. And even from a sports perspective, and even losing weight perspective, you know, there's some good, solid, modern thinking whereby having days off actually helps you get fitter, helps you lose weight, etc.
Yeah, cool, good insight. I'll just take it back to a question around your business and when you were starting Pulse Learning. I read it and heard that you started with €10 and, you know, from there to where it became. To do that, to be an entrepreneur, I would imagine you were highly productive, highly busy all day, every day to build all of that up. And it was always probably in a constant doing. And was there a point at which you became much more comfortable with almost doing nothing, and you know that kind of divide of doing versus being? As you build it up over time, does anything come up when I ask that? Yeah,
I think the if I wouldn't swap where I'm today. You know, I'm 47 years old, be 48 in May. I wouldn't swap where I am mentally today with where I was at 29 when I set up Pulse Learning. Because like it is almost 20 years ago. It's incredible. Oh. But I wouldn't swap, definitely. Like not in a. I wouldn't want to go back at all. And part of that was when I set up Pulse Learning, it was all about, you know, this, you know, working at a higher rate than anybody else. You know, sleeping less, traveling more, working more, putting in more hours, getting more done. And that is wearing for everybody, not just you, but it's wearing for everybody around you.
Sure.
And it's not the smartest way at all. Be Cloud Smart, which is my most recent venture, is a very different approach. It's one where it's really around, I would say, Rob, I spend probably 80% of my time coaching other people.
Right.
And 20% of my time doing.
Okay.
And when I set up Pulse Learning, I was doing 100% of the time.
Okay.
Just doing, directing, and whatever, you burn people out and they move on, and you have to pick up the pieces and you burn the next person out, and you keep on going that cycle.
Yeah.
And that's fine. You can be successful in that, but there's a limit to the success. And no matter how successful you are, I believe that you can be more successful by, and whatever you define success as being, but you can become more successful by, taking a different approach. And I think within all of that, there are certain key values of integrity.
Yeah.
And really, genuinely taking the hit when others would find it easier to lie or to omit telling the full truth or whatever. Taking the hit, be known as the person that people can absolutely trust. And that doesn't mean that, I'm a million miles away from being an angel or being, I've made so many mistakes, and even in the last number of months, I've made some fairly big mistakes, not just business mistakes, but life mistakes.
Right.
And I think the way I've found at the moment is something that I wouldn't swap where I was, and I hope to God I'm still improving so that I'm not making the stupid mistakes I'm making today 5 years from now. And it's certainly not about feeling that I've got it kicked or I've got it licked or I've got it figured out. I really don't. Like and when you make big mistakes now, when I make big mistakes now, they hurt probably even more than they would have done previously.
Right.
And then you got to learn from them, and you got to pick yourself up, and you got to figure out what's the lesson. You got to take your medicine. You got to, take the punishment. You've got to figure out how you do better next time around. And you also got to look at yourself and others and say, that's being human. There's nothing about this that is other than being human.
Yeah.
And being human means you can make mistakes. Try not to make the same mistake twice, and make sure you learn from it. And try and make sure that you're doing better next time around. And like that's so that's so hard. Like that's so difficult to like ultimately it's so difficult to really love yourself enough to allow yourself that. And again, that's part of the journey.
If you had made mistakes 20 years ago, would you have internalized those and given yourself that hard time compared to now, where you might make a mistake and share it with your therapist or be more open about it? Would that change?
I think 20 years ago when I made mistakes, I could point the blame to other people, whereas
right.
My view now is if something goes wrong, the first thing I'll ask is, what could I have done better? And it doesn't mean that I take full responsibility. That's not the point.
Yeah.
Like, I'm dealing with one situation at the moment where, by an objective view, which is very hard to have, but I've put a lot of thought and I've got a lot of support and advice on this. By any objective view, I'm dealing with something that is going to be a big challenge to get righted. And within that, it's about saying, well, what are all the things I can do better? And that's not to say that it's all my fault, or that's not the point. The point
right.
is like, within this, what can I take responsibility for doing better next time around? What can I do in a way that's more loving, more caring? And even, I heard something recently, there's times where, less so and I'm very grateful, less so for me in, say, business or whatever it was, but in a personal context, all of us have situations where, people sometimes, again, everybody's human, right? So people will sometimes do things that hurt you. And this idea of, again, part of meditation, really, really forgiving them, really deeply sending them love and wishing them the very best.
Love and kindness type stuff.
Yeah. And I know it sounds really, crazy, but you do that for, X number of days in a row. And what it does is it just frees your mind up to think differently about trying to fix the issue. And a lot of what I'm doing, because of the complexity of it, whether it be within, the world of mental health or world of business or personal, it can be quite complex. And, I use every advantage I can to try and, think things through as best you can. I know that's probably a bit of a ramble.
No.
It's just sort of kind of thinking about, if you go back 20 years, it was very much, I was right and everybody else was wrong. And you can survive on that. Like Trump survives on that. Donald Trump is there, where he's got a very simplistic view of the world and somehow it works. But, imagine if, you can get yourself beyond that and thinking more around, it's not about me being right and everybody being wrong. It's about, what can you do that you can bring more to the party next time. You can be a better person. You can be a better version of yourself next time around. Like, there's no way I could have set up Cycle Against Suicide in 2002. I was able to set it up in 2012. If I was setting it up tomorrow, I'm not sure if it would be any better, because I do think that there's a whole load of magic occurred. So when I set up Cycle Against Suicide, I'll give it 4 years. And so by the end of 2016, I was out.
Okay.
And, if I was doing it again, would I be able to do a better 4 years? Possibly. I'd hope so. But again, like, the magic was, it happened when it happened, and you can't go back. And today's Cycle Against Suicide is doing really well without my involvement. And that's something, I'm proud of.
Brilliant. Yeah, I was just going to touch on that. It's interesting. I interviewed a guy called Josh Quigley from Scotland, and he tried to commit suicide a few years ago, and he survived. And then he set up this Tartan Explorer, and he became this guy that he got a good persona, good lot of attention out of it for mental health, and tried to cycle around the world, 50,000 miles. He got to 10,000, he stopped. But his journey has been very interesting. He's talking a lot about mental health now, and it's interesting. He took the bike as a vehicle to kind of raise awareness. Why was the bike important? And I know I heard a story that you had about cycling from Kerry to Achill, which sounds like crazy on the best of days. But I was wondering, why did you plan that cycle? Did you bring stuff with you to know you were going to go for a few days, or did it just happen?
Yeah, so the bike for Cycle Against Suicide was very deliberate in that on a bike where you've got two abreast, a conversation takes place where you're not looking at somebody in their face, and there's a different conversation can happen shoulder to shoulder versus head on. And the idea there was, if we could get hundreds of people on bikes together where that conversation can go. And one of my favorite parts about Cycle Against Suicide was, where we'd be on a road between wherever it might be, Moville and Carndon or whatever, and or Skull and Lepp, or wherever it might be, and I'd be on the side of the road, and I'd pull in, and I'd give everybody a clap as they were passing, and there'd be quite a lot of hey, high fives and Jim, whatever, but there'd also be just conversations happening, and almost like this whir of chains and conversation happening. So the reason for the bike within Cycle Against Suicide was very much that idea of an enabler for conversation. Right. I cycled from Kerry to Achill one Christmas. It was actually in the middle of storms. It was when I got to Achill, it took me 2 days or 3 days to get there. When I got to Achill, all of the power was out on Achill Island, and because of the storms. And for me, that was really just about, I guess, having to. In fact, that was the Christmas, I think, of 2013, 2014, and so it was December 2013, and it was really just about survival. You know, I don't mean survival in terms of I've never thought about taking my life. You know, I've been very fortunate that for me, my battle with my mental health has been, you know, a battle of depression, anxiety, etc. It hasn't been a battle of suicidal ideation or suicidal thought. But it was really, for me, it was about survival. You know, it was about trying to somehow survive those few days where I was in an awful place, and, you know, lying in a ball in my bed or on a couch or on the floor was just so utterly painful, you know, so torturously difficult. It really was frighteningly despairingly manic, and it really was something. I felt that staying still was not a safe or a good place for me to be.
Right.
And, you know, to your question specifically, did I pack stuff? I just got on my bike. I remember. So I'm a clean freak. You know, if I'll have a chance to shower 3 times a day, I will.
Right.
I remember that morning. You know, you know, it was December, and it was, you know, dark until 8:30 or whatever, 9:15. I remember not sleeping all night and planning it so that I would get out of bed after not sleeping and get on my bike gear, you know, get into shower, get on my bike gear, because I hadn't showered for a day or two, just, you know, I hadn't been able to sort of get out of bed and just get a shower, get on my bike gear, layers and layers of the warmest gear I could put on, get my pump, get on my bike and go. And I didn't know I was going to Achill, but I did know I wasn't going home that night. Mm-hmm. And I got up to Galway the first night, and I think the second night I got as far as Castlebar, and then the third morning I got into Achill, and it was when I got across the Achill Sound, and I got into I was going to Dwa in Achill, and this lady came out of her house, and she said, "You big idiot, are you after coming from the Sound?" And I said, "I am." I didn't want to tell her. From further. And she said, "What kind of an idiot are you?" I remember telling that story on Brendan O'Connor Saturday Night Show, and I was up in Achill a few weeks later, and anytime I go back to Achill now, they all ask me, how did I get there? Did I walk? Did I run? Did I cycle?
Yeah.
But it was the right thing for me to do that time, and I know it doesn't. I'm not advocating that that's what other people should do, but that was the right thing for me to do for those few days, because staying at home and, you know, trying to just kind of be still with it, it wasn't the answer, you know. And I know, I'm not saying that this is the answer for anybody else, and I'm not saying that everything I've done in my life I've always made the right decision, but that decision at that time was the right decision, because that wasn't a time to sit with it. That was a time to make it work. It being, you know, every part of my body was cold and tired, and I hadn't eaten for a couple of days, and I knew that getting on a bike, I was forcing myself that I needed to eat, I needed to drink water, because, you know, you'd fall over. So it was really a way of just getting your body actually moving again. Yeah. And you know, I got to Achill, and it did feel better, and cycled home a couple of days later, and, you know, by the time I was back in Kerry, it was it was better. You know, it had passed at least. You know, but when something like that happens, Rob, you know, you're not. It's like a flu. You know, you're not better immediately. Sorry, when the flu symptoms go, you're not immediately back to full energy and full. You know, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
It takes a while to kind of get your sleep pattern right again. However, there's a point in that journey where you know it's passing.
Right. And
it's, I don't know, I've never thought about this analogy before, but did you ever have one of those abscesses in your gums or in your, I remember with rowing, you can see my fingers right now, I've got blisters from rowing, but I remember younger, I had this huge kind of infection on my finger, and it was so sore as it was growing. I mean, absolutely so sore, and I should have brought it to the casualty and got it pierced or whatever.
Right.
And then there was this incredible relief when it burst, right?
Okay.
And there's a lovely topic for a podcast, but anyway.
Visual anyway. Yeah.
But that idea of it's burst. Now, all of that stuff has still got to be cleaned out and you've got to heal.
Well, it's a release though, is it?
But it's that moment where you know it's past. And it is like that, you know. And I was in Australia, I said, a few weeks ago, and a girl was in contact with me, and she got into trouble, and she's actually lost both of her sisters to suicide 2 years ago, and she lost both of them within a 6-month period. So this very, very, very terrible set of circumstances, and she wasn't in a great place. And you know, I remember talking with her about, you know, you gotta stay with it now. Right now, there's no easy route. There's no niceness. There's no panacea. There's nothing you can do right now that's going to make it all better at this moment. However, it will pass. And when it passes, you'll know it's passed. And you'll feel that sense of relief. And then the healing starts. Almost then the healing starts. It's almost like I've turned the corner. Now, again, sometimes after it's passed, and after the healing starts, you can get you know, the flu can come back, right? So it can last sometimes multiple times. Even then, it will pass. Yeah. And that's the only thing I'm absolutely sure of. Like the one thing, you know, when someone will come to me and say, look, I want to take my life. There's no way out. My approach is never to argue with that person about that. You know, my approach is not to say, you know, you can't take your life. That's not my decision to make. Sure. What I will say is, the feeling that you have right now will pass, and however terrible you feel, and that then becomes the discussion, and the person might say, "No way, I felt this way before." I said, "If you have, it's passed before." Yeah, you know? You're here, so it's passed before. Exactly, yeah. And it's sometimes trying to elongate that period, and I've had this conversation with, and I guess maybe one of the advantages I have is I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a mental health expert, so I can talk from kind of my own real, authentic experiences. And there's a young girl I met in the psychiatric ward in Cork University Hospital a number of years ago, and it was the first time I'd ever seen a young girl with her arms literally in ribbons, like literally, you know, that phrase, in ribbons. Right. And that was the worst she ever was. And since then, and I get a letter from her at the start of every year. So I came back from Australia in mid-February. I'd been away since mid-December. Yep. And her letter was waiting for me. And it was a beautifully, beautifully, beautifully written letter around how that whole journey, you know, and the point where that was the low point definitely for her, that every year has been progressively better, but it doesn't mean that there aren't dips. It doesn't mean that there aren't parts. And when those dips occur, she can very much cling on to this will pass. And knowing that it will pass in the middle of the storm it's such this wonderful gift you can give yourself. And again, if somebody's listening today in trouble, you know, that would be the thing to leave with is whatever way we think, and I know those thoughts, whatever way we think at our worst, our mind will tell us that this is the way it always will be, where actually it isn't. It does change. Just like, it's impossible to be happy all the time. If I say, look, Rob, be happy for the next hour, maybe you could do it. But if I say, be happy for the next 2 weeks, it's really hard to be happy. Or if I say, look, be sad for the next 2 weeks, it's really hard to be purely sad. That's not the way our mind works.
Yeah. And again, that's powerful. And I think where I connect to that story, it's the meditation. It's kind of taking that meta thinking. You're taking that step away. You're thinking about thinking, or you're seeing that, and you realize that's just something that you're thinking about now. It's not you. It's part of you, and all of that goes along with it. So I think that's, for me, very powerful in that respect as well.
Yeah, I've heard it described maybe as this idea that just to be in a position where you can observe, and you're not just necessarily observing yourself, you're observing a situation, and I definitely was not able to do that for the majority of my life. When something happened, I immediately, reacted.
Connected with it, yeah.
And now something happens and I'm much better positioned to be able to observe and take a moment to figure out, like I was watching the rugby yesterday, and I'm absolutely astounded at, Stockdale and Sexton and all these amazingly skillful players who can manage to think so quickly about things that are happening so fast. And actually, it's because they've worked on them over and over and over and over and over again. Yeah. Like, I don't know if you remember Stockdale's try just before half time yesterday. Yeah. Like how he got that, how he didn't fall, how he didn't stumble, how he managed to touch it down with pressure just before the line. And yet, that's what he does. And I think if you look at that in the context of, mental health, emotional well-being, it's just sometimes we have to really operate at that level of skill to be able to manage things. But we can, it's a question of practicing.
Practice and discipline is absolutely it. Jim, I've taken up a lot of your time this morning. Time flies when we're talking about some really interesting stuff. So thanks so much for that. I'll leave with maybe just two quick ones. When you think of advice that you've been given or advice you like to give, is there anything that typically comes to mind around the area of advice?
I think the two things I guess come to mind. Number one is I'm very conscious of taking advice from people who have been on the journey, as opposed to people who haven't been on the journey. And I factor that in. So if somebody's giving me advice and they face similar issues, or they have an empathy because they've got a particular understanding because of where they're coming from, I tend to put more weighting on that advice. That I guess is one thing. And the second thing is, there's a dear friend of mine, Brennan O'Connell, who actually tragically died on Cycle Against Suicide. He was one of our motorcycle marshals, and he died keeping us safe. It was a tragic event. But Brennan used to say it in very simple terms, that for every piece of advice there's an opposite piece of advice. And he used to quote, a stitch in time saves 9, but don't mend it unless it's broken, or many hands make light work, but too many cooks spoil the broth. Yeah. And I think one thing about advice is try and find counter truths and try to hold those counter truths as you're deciding what makes sense for you. So whatever situation you're in life, there's more than one truth in terms of, dealing with it, and try and hold the counter truths. And so for example, if you're in, if there's a problem within your relationship with somebody, it may be true to say that person has done X, Y, and Z wrong, and as a result, they really are at fault, and that might be completely true. And it might also be completely true that, the reason that they've done it is coming from situation X, Y, Z that you might have been part of, and that might be equally true. And that's not to let go of the first one. It's to hold them both and say, as a result of kind of thinking about them both. So I think in terms of advice, I would say, try to get contrarian advice. Try to get advice that is not the advice of the majority. Again, for me, some of the best advice I've got is from younger people, teenagers, and who, like when I'm interviewing somebody for a job, one thing I'll ask is, what's the last thing you learned, and what can you teach me right now? Mm-hmm. And sometimes if I'm introducing like a senior VP, from a very large company, they'll struggle to tell me the last thing they learned, because they're looking for something really kind of deep. And if I ask them what can they teach me right now, they'll struggle because they're trying to find something, powerful or big or whatever. You said it to a 16-year-old, in about 30 seconds, they'll say, what did I learn? Well, I learned this on social media. I learned this about this singer. I learned this is something I like to eat. This is something I like to do. There's things I learn all the time. Mm-hmm. And what will I teach you? And you can get great lessons, taught to you from young people. So I think, with advice, try and get the contrarian view. Try and get the view that doesn't follow the majority, because there may be something in that worth heeding.
Okay, very good. Last one. Success is a question I like to wrap up with. You asked me before the podcast how successful it is, and I was like, my definition of success is sitting down talking to you and meeting really interesting people and getting great stories that I can put out there. So for me, I'm living it at the moment. Yeah. What is success for you right now, and are you in a successful place?
I think that probably from a selfish perspective or a self-full perspective, success is around being on this journey I'm on right now, which is a journey of kind of there's revelation, there's things I'm learning about myself, about the world, about people around me. Mm-hmm. I think the thing I feel most purposeful doing is certainly, like, I've got 5 senior women that I coach right now. Some of them are in business, some of them are in charity, not for profit, and I love coaching them, and I do it very much on my terms, which is important, in that I don't charge, and it's done in a way where it's very natural and organic and simple, and I learn as much from the people in coaching as they might learn from me, or I learn more from the people in coaching than they might pick up from me. And I feel very purposeful about helping others in that way. Mm-hmm. And I also think that success is, whatever skills I have, if I can apply them, whether it be within the Wheel, the charity that I work with, or whether it be in other areas where, you can multiply other people's efforts, that good is done. That's great, and I think, thankfully, success was never something that was around making money or you see how I'm dressed today. It's not about, material stuff. It just isn't for me. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing or a good thing. Just it hasn't been for me. What it is about is this sense of being purposeful about what you're doing. And thankfully, right now, and I'm really grateful that I'm in a position where I am able to work on the I Am Here campaign in Australia that we'll be bringing over here to Europe. Cool. The Spark Change campaign with the Wheel. I love the coaching I'm doing with the 5 women that I get such an amount of value out of. And I also really enjoy working with schools, particularly talking around mental health. Again, there's huge benefit comes back to that with me. Yep. And then finally, I guess, Be Cloud Smart and Pulse Learning from an entrepreneurial perspective. I love what we're achieving there in terms of, people being able to apply their talents and stretch themselves in a way they haven't been stretched before. So I'm really grateful that I'm able to take part in all of those things, which is predominantly around working with other people. And then beside all of that, I'm back rowing, which I kind of did in my teens and when I was going to university, and I'm loving being back rowing, which is really more about me, if you like. And I'm loving what I'm getting out of it. I did a time trial here in Galway yesterday.
Okay.
Didn't do well.
Right.
But it's great to be back in the game.
Competition and that. Yeah.
And got hammered actually yesterday. I got beaten badly, and it's totally fine. Like it's it's all around saying, well, can I get a couple of seconds faster the next time around? And there's something nice about that too.
Yeah, there's lots of meaningful work going on there by the sounds of things.
Yeah,
you're in a good place.
Great place. I honestly think that I've never been as healthy as I am this moment.
Brilliant. Great way to end it, Jim. That was fascinating. I'm really delighted we had the chance to talk, and I can't wait to share it.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
How was that? Did you enjoy it? I hope so. If you did, please like, share, and do all that other good stuff that only takes a second on social media but means an awful lot to me as it spreads the reach. You can get the details from the show in the show notes on the website robofthegreen.ie. In there you can share the show out with others. I really just want to touch on 3 other quick things. 1, feedback. I learned so much from it. Without it, I can't improve. Please give me a bit of feedback, positive, negative, constructive. Would you recommend a book? Do you have any other ideas for guests? How about more video? Let me know what you want and I can make it happen. I will try. That's number 1. Number 2, sharing is caring. This year I'm making more of an effort to try and expand the reach. Facebook, there's a page and there's a group. The 1% Better community on Facebook is where I really hope new listeners go to, share ideas, comments, in general things that they could help others with. That's what it's there for. Follow me on Spreaker.com, that's the new host. I'm on Twitter, growing not exponentially at all, but slowly. So please follow there. I'm on Instagram. All of these are at Rob of the Green. LinkedIn, Rob O'Donoghue. Get in touch. Would love to hear from you. Number 3 is about support. So I'm offering a few hours a month, pro bono, free coaching to those that can't afford it, that need some coaching, that want some coaching. If you go to the website, the support page, click on the pro bono link. On the flip side of that, where you guys can support me, go to patreon.com, the Rob of the Green page. You can make a donation there. You can get access to exclusive content, which I'm adding all the time. That would be awesome. Anything you contribute will go back into the show to make it better, make it more than 1% better. Also, there's the option to buy one of those books that were recommended through the website, which will bring you to Amazon, which will get you the normal links, which will get you the books at the normal price, but supposedly Amazon will give the show a small donation every time a book is purchased, or anything for that matter, which is great. So finally, I just wanted to say thanks so much for listening. I know it's difficult to make improvements, to push things forward, to get outside your comfort zone. I'm trying to do it all the time. I hope that every listen and every show and every guest that is on gives you something to take away that you could apply, adopt and adapt into your own life to create a new habit, to make something better. Don't overreach. Small improvements, 1% is enough. And thank yourself for making the time to listen to the show. It shows you're interested in learning, improving and getting better, even if it's just 1% at a time. Have a great day and good luck.